And okay. So welcome to, excuse me, welcome to our second installment of our journey through the Jewish year, which today I wanted to talk. I had said last week that maybe we would talk about Tu B'Shvat today. We'll hold off on that until next week. I wanted to talk today about Martin Luther King Day and to relate that to what this journey through the Jewish year, and to just reiterate what my vision for this class is. It's not just about talking about the holidays that come up over the course of the year and Shabbat as well, but it's also about talking about Jewish concepts and other things that come up too. And one of those concepts is, how do we navigate the Jewish calendar with the federal and secular calendar, and whether we incorporate that secular calendar here in America, how do we incorporate the American calendar into our Jewish calendar? And depending on the federal holiday will depend upon how much of a broad spectrum of the Jewish community observes it. So in other words, if it were July 4th, Independence Day, that's something that most Jewish Americans celebrate. Celebrate the idea of thanking God that we're citizens of America, that our ancestors were able to find sanctuary on these shores and be granted citizenship and be able to lead productive lives and contribute to American society. So there's certainly to celebrate July 4th and American Independence Day. That's something that all Jews would be happy about, and especially since being from Philadelphia, and one of the symbols of American independence is the Liberty Bell. On the Liberty Bell itself is a verse from the book of Leviticus: proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. So there's another connection with Torah, with Judaism, and with and Chaim Solomon was a wealthy Jew in America at the time of the Revolutionary War, and he helped bankroll the Continental Army so that they would have the funds necessary to keep on fighting. So we have a Jewish connection to the July 4th. And Memorial Day, of course, we have whether people watching this are veterans themselves or have family members who are veterans, Memorial Day in May is certainly a time for us as Jews to incorporate that into our calendar as well. But a day like Christmas, which is a federal holiday, you can understand how that might not be incorporated into a Jewish calendar. And in fact, my oldest child, my daughter, when she became a teacher, her first job was working at a yeshiva. She has a degree in special ed, a master's in special ed, and she was a teacher in a yeshiva high school in New Jersey, which made it a point to hold classes on that so-called normal winter break. So classes were in session December 25th through January 1st. And in the yeshiva world, yeshiva vacation is actually this week. Always the week of Martin Luther King Day is the time to in the Orthodox world. Orthodox yeshivas are off from school this week, to make it a point to teach on Christmas, because we should not, the Orthodox community, should not be seen as celebrating that holiday in any way. In Israel, as a matter of fact, any hotel, well, let me say it this way. All the hotels in Israel that have kitchens are certified kosher by the chief rabbinate. The chief rabbinate has, different offices in different municipalities throughout the country. And depending where the hotel is located, that local chief rabbinate provides kashrut certification for those kitchens. So all hotels in Israel are by definition kosher. But a condition of their kashrut is they cannot have a Christmas tree in their lobby, even if Christian tourists predominate in that particular hotel. They're not allowed to have a Christmas tree, and they're not allowed to have a New Year's Eve celebration, because New Year's Eve in Israel, New Year's Day is called Sylvester, because January 1st, every day in the Christian calendar has a saint associated with that day, at least one saint. So Saint Sylvester is January 1st, and according to the chief rabbinate, celebrating New Year's Eve and New Year's Day would be as if you'd be celebrating the saint, and God forbid, the chief rabbinate says, a hotel should have some kind of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day celebration. If they did that, their kashrut certification would be revoked. So we obviously we don't do that here in America, but it's just interesting as this conversation about this, how we incorporate the secular calendar into the Jewish calendar. So the question is, one of the newer federal holidays, of course, is Martin Luther King Day, which we celebrate today. And for that, I think that we could all agree that there are aspects of this day and what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King stood for, may he rest in peace, are certainly very Jewish things. I wanted to look at a couple of paragraphs from Dr. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which he gave on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on August 28th, 1963, and show you a couple of verses that he quotes from our Bible, from the prophets Amos, and Isaiah, how he incorporated that into his speech, and then his vision for a just society, which is really what we celebrate today, and his the motivation for all of us to try to live up to Dr. King's vision, and how it relates to what is a Jewish vision of a just society. In other words, what do we know from rabbinic tradition about how we are supposed to conduct ourselves, and what our society is supposed to look like in terms of promoting justice and equality for all. So I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see, yeah, here it is. So this is, you Google "I Have a Dream" speech. I Googled transcript "I Have a Dream" speech. There are a couple things, not a couple. There are hundreds of sites that come up. This is the second or third one. It's from Stanford University, the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute. So this is a transcript of the audio of that day. So you'll see that they have brackets here and parentheses of other sounds that were occurring as Dr. King was speaking that day. So they mention applause here and some other comments like, "All right," and "My Lord," yeah, as if he was in church preaching this sermon. So the point of this sermon was that it was a march on Washington for jobs and freedom. Okay, or it was part of the Poor People's Campaign to march on Washington. So it wasn't a march that day in August for racial justice for we would say the Negro, as Martin Luther King himself referred to himself and others in 1963. That was the predominant term. We would, of course, say blacks today. It wasn't a march for racial justice for the blacks. It was a march in general for jobs and freedom. So within that, he comments on, we have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. So he talks about jobs, he talks about poverty, he talks about how it's a common goal. In order to achieve the bigger goal of racial justice, you have to start with the smaller goal of achieving wealth equity, or at least bringing people out of poverty and providing reasonable jobs, that would sustain families for America too. Once you achieve that, and people are comfortable in their life, they are eased out of the anxiety of poverty and where they are going to find a means to support their family. If you can get out of that quagmire, then you can be in a better place to achieve racial justice. So that was his main theme in this speech. And I'm just looking for the verses that he quotes here. That he quotes, yes, here it is. We are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's a verse from the prophet Amos, and many in the audience would recognize that. Those who attend church on a Sunday morning, especially a predominantly black church, would be familiar with many verses from the Bible, especially verses from the prophets who have a call like this that is universal. Justice should roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Many people who go to church on a regular basis on a Sunday, who listened to and were there for King's speech, would understand it, right? So this comment here that was there, let's go, tell it, would be a typical comment for hearing a verse quoted from the Bible like that. And the prophet Amos and all of the prophets in the prophets section of our Bible, their job was to translate God's word to them, to the people of Israel, in order to eradicate idolatry from the land of Israel, whether it's the northern kingdom of Israel or the southern kingdom, depending who the prophet was speaking to, and to remind the people of their purpose on earth is to follow the covenant with God and ensure that there be a just society. So even though the prophets were speaking to the people of Israel, it's obviously their message is a universal message for all people on earth. And so by quoting Amos there and quoting Isaiah as well, I'd have to, just looking quickly, I can't find the Isaiah quote right now, but still, it was quite common for the Reverend Martin Luther King. That's how he was speaking that day, not as a PhD doctor, but as a reverend, using the language that he's familiar with and universalizing it for all, so that all would be able to access that message of justice for all. So I wanted to highlight that. And then now I just want to now relate Martin Luther King's vision to what does the Torah teach us about how we should have a just society. And a reminder again, if anybody has a question or a comment, feel free to just go into the chat feature and type a question in, or unmute yourself and just ask a question. Feel free to interrupt to do that as we go. So the Torah in a few places teaches us what we are supposed to do in order to conduct ourselves justly. So when we think of Torah, we think of ritual law and how we are supposed to define our relationship to God. That arguably that would be the first thing we think of when we think of Torah. And so we think of the book of Leviticus and all of the sacrifices that we're supposed to offer in the portable sanctuary in the Mishkan and later in the temple in Jerusalem. So that's certainly one aspect that we think of about the Torah. We think about the 10 Commandments. We think about all the holidays that are to be observed. But certainly another main feature of the Torah is that the vision of Moses and God speaking to the people of Israel in the desert with a vision of what it will be like when the people enter the promised land. So entering the promised land of Israel doesn't happen in the Torah. It happens then in the book of Joshua, the book that comes right after the Torah. But the vision of the Torah is given to the people on how to live their lives in the land of Israel. So the Torah defines the boundaries of the land of Israel and where all the tribes will be living in the land of Israel. And then in the book of Exodus, in the portion Mishpatim, we're told in great detail how we are supposed to legislate our relationship to our fellow human beings. So we're given a long list of laws in which how we are supposed to conduct our affairs in business, having just weights, so a standard set of weights when we're weighing something and selling it, to how we are supposed to build our houses with a parapet on the roof to make sure that nobody would fall off accidentally, not to, if we pass something that is clearly lost on the road, whether an animal or an object, we have to return lost items, aspects like that, that from which we gain an understanding that we are supposed to treat each other equally and fairly and justly. So there are those laws there in the portion Mishpatim. And then in the portion Kedoshim in the book of Leviticus, we're told extensively how we are supposed to treat each other ethically. So we have the laws of how we are supposed to, how we are supposed to lead a just society, but it's not enough to have laws which are the lowest common denominator, ensuring that our society is fair. We also, according to the Torah, want to have an ethical society so that there is a higher level than just following the law. We want to be nice. We want to be holy. We want to rise above the law. And the portion Kedoshim, chapters 19 and 20 of Leviticus, point out to us how we can rise above just the law and be a moral and ethical people. Love your neighbor as you would be loved is the core of that section of Kedoshim, and everything else follows from. Don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. So in other words, be actively involved to ensure people's safety and equity. We want to be inclusive of all people and welcoming to all people, etc. So we have the portion Mishpatim, chapters 20 and 21 of Exodus, giving us the laws to follow. The portion Kedoshim, chapters 19 and 20 of Leviticus, giving us the moral and ethical principles to follow. And then there's economy. It's one thing to have a just society and an ethical, moral society. You need, as Dr. King pointed out in his speech, you need to have work. You need to be able to sustain a family. And if you can do that, then you are in a better position to be able to follow all of these laws. And so at the end of the book of Leviticus, we are reminded about the economy of the land of Israel. Assuming that everybody's a farmer, that the vision in the Torah is that everyone would be farming the land of Israel. If everybody is a farmer, then the economy is based on faith. It is really based on faith. Every seventh year, there's a 7-year cycle of farming the land of Israel. Every seventh year, the people have to have faith to not farm and to leave the land lie fallow. And so for 6 years, people will be farming the land, bringing in produce. And there will be enough food if the people have faith and follow the covenant. If they follow the portion Mishpatim, if they follow the portion Kedoshim, if everyone is just and ethical and moral, then they won't have to worry, because the rain will come at the right time. They will have bountiful harvests every year. And the 6th year will have an extra bountiful harvest to carry the people over into the 7th year so that they can let the land rest. People have Shabbat every 7th day of the week. The land has Shabbat every 7th year. So the land of Israel, which is holy, gets to rest every 7th year. The people of Israel who are holy get to rest every 7th day. So with that 7th year, the economy of Israel then, based on farming, is based on faith. And it is, one could understand it to be almost in theory what a communist society is supposed to be. That everyone will have food, everybody will have produce that will sustain them. And we have to also leave a corner of the field all the time for the poor. When we are harvesting, if something falls out of our hands, we can't bend down to pick it up. We have to leave it there also for the poor. So while we are harvesting, that part of the economy also ensures that the poor, someone whose land is not productive, or whatever situation someone is in, they are impoverished, they will be sustained by the community. So the Torah's vision is a vision of a just, of a faithful, following the covenant with God, with a legal, ethical, and moral society. That is the vision of the Torah, and that is the vision that the rabbis translated for us in their interpretation of the Torah as they wrote the legal books, the Mishnah and the Gemara, and the subsequent books over the centuries that reiterate this focus on justice and equity for all. Any questions or comments so far about this? So, yeah. So in the Mishnah and the Talmud, we have a lot of focus of attention is on the civil law that is presented mainly in the portion Mishpatim and similar verses to it elsewhere in the Torah. We have a whole section on civil law that are 3 sections, known as by their titles Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra, together are part of a section known as Nazikin, which are civil damages, but it's all about conducting um, a just society. So we might think of prison as a form of punishment that is integral to in the American legal system. The Jewish legal system doesn't know about prison. The way society works according to the Torah and how the rabbis interpret it is that you steal something, for example, from somebody else, you give that object back, or you give the value of that object back to the person who stole it. And depending on the object, you give it back either double, triple, or quadruple the value. And if you can't afford to give back accordingly, then you don't go to prison to pay it back or to be punished. You are indentured as a servant to that person to work the amount of time that it would take to pay for that object appropriately. So the system is right. So I'll get to your question, Mindy, in just a second. So for the rabbis, there's no sense of prison because that for them doesn't translate based on what the Torah is teaching about what a just society is. It's how we get along with one another. How does prison help? The idea of, I'm just looking at my screen. I see David is right next to me on my screen. So if I steal something from David, how does it help him if I don't return the object to him and I go to jail instead? How does that help David? That there's nothing, he doesn't get his, let's say I steal his car, okay? And then I go ram it and crash it. So David doesn't get his car back. I go to jail. So how does that teach me a lesson if I steal the car, that I shouldn't steal a car anymore? I'm going to jail. And if I'm a poor person, for the rabbis, the idea that somebody's stealing something could be because they're poor, they need something. Well, okay, I'm taken care of in prison. I'm given a bed. I have food, 3 meals a day. My health is taken care of as well. What I'm learning, but if I'm going to jail, is that I can be taken care of by the state or by the government. So it's not teaching me a lesson that I shouldn't steal. It's actually teaching me that there's a way out of poverty. Just steal and you can go to jail and be taken care of. I'm oversimplifying, obviously. And what does David get out of this? I stole his car. He doesn't get a car back. So the vision that the Torah has and the rabbis have is that of responsibility for our actions. If I steal a car from David, I need to give that car back. And depending, I'd have to check on the sources in the Gemara. The equivalent would be, I guess, a cart that would be attached to a horse or a donkey. If I steal a cart, what would be the, do I give just the value of the cart back, or do I give double the value of the cart back? Whatever it is, I need to give that back to David. And if I can't afford to give it back, like I don't have the car, or I don't have the value of the car to give back to David, then I have to work for him. And assuming he has land or he owns a business, I work for him for the amount of time that I would be paid. And that money that I would be paid would go to paying back for a car. And that's the amount of time I would work until I've paid off my debt to David. Certainly sounds like a more equitable way to run society. And it sounds like a way to teach lessons to people, which is what it's supposed to be. We are responsible for our actions. If we do good things, we're supposed to be rewarded. If we do bad things, we get punished. That's simply put, that's how the Torah teaches it, and that's how the rabbis express it in terms of when we wrong somebody else. So Mindy asks a question, so what happens when we are not farming the land anymore? What does the economy look like then? So that's a fair question, Mindy, and yes. So the economic vision that the Torah presents was only in force when all the tribes of Israel were living in the land of Israel. Okay, and that was enforced then. So if we add dates, which we can only guess at, let's say Moses lived at about between 1300, 1200 BCE. So they settled the land of Israel around 1200 BCE. And the northern tribes of Israel were exiled by the Assyrians in the 8th century BCE, I think around 776, something like that BCE. So roughly speaking, 450 years they were in the land of Israel as a nation, as a whole, the whole 12 tribes. Once those tribes were, 10 of those tribes were exiled to never be heard from again, hence the concept of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and wondering who these tribes are from among the rest of the nations, different ideas, like the Ethiopian Jews, for example. There's a theory that they are descended from the tribe of Dan, but we don't know for sure. There are Jews in India, an ancient Jewish community in India. Maybe they're related. They're the B'nai Menashe, they're called. So perhaps they're related to the tribe of Menashe. We don't know. These are just theories about where some of the lost tribes have ended up around the world. But the point is that when all those tribes are not in the land of Israel, then we can't follow completely all the laws of the sabbatical, because in that same section in which every 7th year the land has to lie fallow, then because 7 is an important number and a holy number in the Torah, 7 times 7 is an important number, that's 49. The 50th year is called a Jubilee year. And that's what that verse on the Liberty Bell is talking about, that in the 50th year, let's say you need money, you could mortgage your land to somebody else. So let's say David is I'm picking on David again because on my screen, he's right next to me. David's a wealthy banker in the land of Israel besides being a farmer. My farm isn't doing well and hasn't done well for a couple of years. I asked David for a loan, so I mortgaged my land to him. So in the 50th year, no matter when I take out this mortgage, in the 50th year, I get that land back. No questions asked, mortgage is over. So it raises questions about how far along in the 50-year cycle does one take out a mortgage? Your mortgage rates would be better if you take out a mortgage in the 2nd year of the 50-year cycle than it would be in the 49th year of the 50-year cycle, because the chance of getting all your money back is greater the further away from the 50th year the mortgage is taken. So my limited knowledge of math skills, I think that makes sense. And hopefully that's enough detail that we can have about that. But the idea is that the land reverts to its original tribal owner. And you can only do that if all the tribes are living in the land of Israel. So that, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof means that you're free from debt in the 50th year. You're free, that the liberty is freedom. The dror is the Hebrew word there, ukratem dror ba'aretz. You proclaim liberty. So that word dror is not, would not necessarily be the word for freedom in the context of an Independence Day or a revolution, but more of a freedom from debt, liberty from debt. And so that's what that means in context. And so you can only do that, again, once all of the tribes of Israel are in the land. So the economy then for the rabbis, even in the time of the rabbis, the economy of the Jewish community was in transition from a total agrarian society to a more business model that people had stalls in the marketplace. They were bankers, things like that. So the then you need to understand the principles in the Torah and apply that to all the kind of work that we do. So the principles in the Torah, though they are seen as specific to an agriculture-based society, it's to be understood in broader terms if, first of all, to have faith in God that our business, that our livelihood will succeed. So that's an essential element of how we just lead our lives, that we need to have faith in God. We need to follow all of the laws. And if we follow those laws, then we are comforted in knowing that we are protected by God in some way. But we don't lead our lives just on hoping for God to provide. We need to be partners with God and to lead our lives in a moral, ethical, and faith-based way. And so how we treat our neighbor, how we treat our fellow human being, what kind of business that we are involved in, all of them should be based on justice and equity. And so what came to mind when I said that is, in my day when I was in rabbinical school, the library side of the seminary building of the Jewish Theological Seminary is on the corner of 122nd and Broadway. And it's a four-sided square building with a courtyard in the middle. And the eastern side of the square was the library building. And it was rebuilt just before I entered rabbinical school in 1984. And it had a name, of course, when, all buildings, well, all universities have names on them for the family that contributed the most money to help this goal. So Ivan and Sima Boski, he was like an insider trader on Wall Street, made his money in a Wall Street market. So it was the Ivan and Sima Boski family library. Well, it just turns out while I was in rabbinical school, freshman or sophomore year, Ivan Boski was accused and sent to prison for the insider trading that he did. So we're supposed to conduct our affairs justly, no matter what business we're in. We can also think, of course, of Bernie Madoff and what he did with his pyramid scheme, bilking Hadassah of $90 million and bilking Elie Wiesel, the foremost Holocaust survivor, spokesperson for justice and ethics, not just for the Jewish people, but for the world community, bilking him of his fortune as well. So you think about what kind of business we're supposed to be in. So the seminary had an ethical dilemma, what to do with the name on the building and with the money. Well, they took the name off the building, so it was no longer the Ivan and Sima Boski family library, but I believe they did keep the money. And now that whole building is knocked down anyway, and they're building a new building, combination library, residence hall, conference center, and whatnot. So I haven't seen it since it was completed, which was this year during the pandemic. I believe it was completed. But it raises still, I bring that just as one of many examples that we could think of how the Torah provides us the framework for a just and ethical society. And of course, it's up to us as individuals to live up to it or not. And it's up to us as a society to ensure that the people who go against the law are punished accordingly. And again, we are partners with God in this process. And so what back to Martin Luther King, what the idea of observing Martin Luther King Day and how appropriate it is to incorporate this into our journey through the Jewish year is pretty obvious. If Martin Luther King himself, may rest in peace, can call on Jewish images, biblical images in his speech and his call for justice, if he can partner with Abraham Joshua Heschel and many other Jewish leaders at the time, so my father just added a little bit of context there for Boski. Look in the chat. If Martin Luther King can incorporate Jewish images, biblical images into his talk, we also can incorporate and get back to the day of profound partnership between the Jewish community and the Black community in America. That we as Jews are by nature progressive when it comes to values, okay? And that sure, there are Jews who are Republican, and I'm not doing this to be divisive. I'm doing it in terms of classically speaking. There are Jews who could claim that a conservative agenda, conservative with small c, a conservative agenda when it comes to public policy can be a Jewish concept. But traditionally speaking, the Democratic Party policy is more in line with a classic Jewish vision, that society's role is to take care of everyone in society. That's not the Republican Party position classically. It's the Democratic Party position classically, right? That the role of government is to take care of everyone in the population. That is the Torah's vision. The role of society is to take care of everyone in society. If you are a farmer, you need to leave your corner of your field to the poor and the disadvantaged. While you are harvesting, if the harvest falls out of your hands, you leave it for the poor and the disadvantaged. Every year there is a tithe that is contributed to the Levites who don't have land. Their job is to serve in the temple in Jerusalem. And some of those years there's an extra tithe that we have to take to give to the widowed, the poor, and the orphan in the community. So there are laws in the Torah itself to ensure how we take care of our own. And there are extra laws as well to ensure that we are treating everyone equally and fairly in the community. So that is why Jews historically have more been in line with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party, because of the idea that government's job is to take care of everyone in the community. So obviously, with the politics has been inflamed the past couple of years, and I'm not talking about the far left in the Democratic Party or the far right in the Republican Party. There are good Jews who are part of the Republican Party, and you can claim that those are Jewish values for which they stand, and there are Jews in the Democratic Party who can claim those positions as Jewish positions too. Any other questions or comments about this topic of a just society? So that's really all I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to wish everyone, usually the past couple of years, we as a congregation have been part of the Montgomery County effort as a day of service in Montgomery County. And our building was a place where people could gather to do work, volunteer work, making things, making food and that would then be contributed to the poor. And unfortunately, this year we couldn't do those hands-on activities, but we look forward to next year being able to do that. And we're also, our congregation on January 27th, happens to be my mother's birthday, but it happens that Wednesday night next week, we're going to have what we hope will be a long series of events with Round Oak Baptist Church, which is in Burtonsville, Maryland, which is a predominantly Black church. We're working together with them on a program that evening, January 27th, with which we've been advertising about from the Equal Justice Initiative that's based in Alabama for the work of trying to get involved in racial justice initiatives. And hopefully that will lead to subsequent conversations between our two congregations on how we can work together moving forward in promoting racial justice in our local community. So I wish everybody a good day. May we carry forward Martin Luther King's memory, and may his memory always be a source of blessing and inspiration to us. And I hope people stay safe and healthy. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.